Hello everybody, welcome back to another ASMR video. This is a book that finally came out. It was supposed to come out months ago, but it was delayed. And it is The World of Assassin's Creed Valhalla, Journey to the North, Logs and Files of a Hidden One. This may have some spoilers in it, so if you have not yet played the Valhalla game, I suggest playing it unless you don't care about spoilers, in which case feel free to continue watching. Now, I'm not sure if there are spoilers or not, but we shall see. So, let's start. Let's see what's inside. From the Records of Hytham, as collected by Rick Barba. In the game, Hytham was the leader of the Assassin Bureau in your village. So, this is a pretty easy book. We have 4 chapters. Introduction. Chapter 1, Viking Culture. Chapter 2, Viking Lore. Chapter 3, The Viking Settlement. Chapter 4, The Viking Age. And Epilogue. Introduction. This is my official record of our Brotherhood's engagement with the Order of the Ancients in the northern kingdom of Norway and England in the years 872 to 878 CE. With the apparent demise of my master, Basim ibn Ishaq, the job of reporting these momentous events has fallen solely to me. Hytham the Alkalite. I openly admit that I am not privy to all that Master Basim has seen and heard, but I will attempt to faithfully discharge this duty of account to the best of my ability. Before I start, however, let me point out one thing increasingly clear to me. We Hidden Ones have been absent far too long from this darkening island. The Order of the Ancients operated unfettered in England for 4 centuries, dating back to the Roman withdrawal, and thus we've had much catch-up work to do. To this end, I decided to share intelligence with my Viking hosts, especially any info gathered from my nascent network of agents in England's festering cities. Working with the Raven clan, I felt we could make significant progress together. As Mentor Rayhan once wrote to me, work in the dark of oppression, serve the light of freedom. Our story begins in Constantinople, where Basim and I first met the Norse warrior prince named Sigurd Striborgian. There we served as his shepherds, as he called it, through our homeland, the Abbasid Caliphate. Sigurd found us fascinating and often joked that we seemed part of a brotherhood of shadows, a designation that hit much closer to truth than he realized. Sigurd, in turn, shepherded us north to his own homeland of Norway. This sojourn served our greater purpose of countering the spread of the Order through Anglo-Saxon Christendom and the Norse regions, purging its evil wardens and minions from those northern lands. Once there, we met Sigurd's Viking kinfolk, countrymen who called themselves the Raven clan. One of the very first we met upon our arrival was Sigurd's adopted sibling, Eivor. By all accounts, Eivor was an extraordinary warrior with almost preternatural physical skills, as well as hidden depths, a perfect candidate, certainly, for apprenticeship in our ranks. And yet, when Basim gifted her with a sacred wristblade almost immediately, it seemed premature. I feared that without extensive training and the proper devotion to our creed, Eivor would misuse the weapon. Indeed, Eivor immediately strapped the blade to the wrong side of her wrist. I was appalled. But as my mentor duly reminded me, it is not the weapon itself, but the mind wielding it that counts most. Even as Eivor fixed her bracer incorrectly, and marked our missing fingers as a mistake, Basim was forgiving of tone and generous with his guidance. In truth, I should not have doubted. Eivor was a remarkably adept learner. She wielded the hidden blade with surprising skill, quickly mastering even the artful trimming of our legend airstrikes. Her ability to execute stealth techniques so swiftly was humbling. Those took me many weeks to master, I'm embarrassed to admit. And so, please bear with me as I recount the following story by way of introduction to Eivor, as I find it both illustrative and significant. One day, not long after Ravensthorpe was founded in England, Eivor stopped at my tent. I was staking out perimeter measurements and hewing support posts for the Hidden Ones Bureau I hoped to build. I'd explained how my Brotherhood needed a base of operations for tracking our enemies in England. I listed the major cities infested by the Order, London, Jorvik, and Winchester, and described perhaps a bit too vigorously how this vile cult spreads its plague of illusion. This is our sole purpose, I exclaimed, to liberate the body and spirit of man from unnatural shackles. Eivor was a bit taken aback by my passion, I suspect, but graciously offered to help. Indeed, over the next few days, Eivor provided supplies, raw materials, and the labor I needed to build our bureau. The final edifice ended up far more aesthetically pleasing than I dared hope for such a pre-patrick people. Vikings build remarkably durable structures and exhibit an unerring eye for clean lines. In thanking Eivor, I re-emphasized our common cause and how tightly our concerns overlapped. I implored Eivor to actively assist those in need. Beneficent actions are their own reward, of course, but grateful people may also reveal clues that can help us track down our foes. In particular, I pressed Eivor to target London, where the Order was operating without restraint. Eivor agreed to take it up with Raven leaders. At that moment, something about Eivor's essential persona, a deep well of sincerity, reminded me of how Basim so quickly saw something that he trusted implicitly. Inspired by this, I decided it was time for my new partner to take a step forward in consciousness. I led Eivor directly across the Nene River from Ravensthorpe to a cliff's edge. There, I invited her to experience our Brotherhood's most sacred and exhilarating ritual of initiation, the leap of faith. At first, like most initiates, including myself, Eivor was reluctant to jump. But once I did, she followed almost immediately. Afterward, her response was as I expected. I felt madness and vigor and a purging of fear, she exclaimed, acknowledging that it was indeed a gift, as I'd promised. This rite, I explained, dated back more than 1,000 years to before the birth of the Christian Jesus. It was a rite that had long steadied us in our resolve. Eivor pointed out her own people yearning to rule land they could call their own, but I dissuaded her from any notion that this desire was even remotely comparable to the Order's ambition, that twisted, dishonorable, unprincipled urge to subjugate. In fact, as I told Eivor, I felt our purposes were perfectly aligned. The Raven clan neutralizes potential foes by forming alliances in good faith and building trust. Meanwhile, we Hidden Ones work in the shadows to rescue England from a deepening rot. Yes, the darkness of oppression had been spreading unchecked for far too long. It was time we agreed to serve the light. Over time, in many missions, I've developed a level of trust with Eivor that I find not only strategically valuable, but also personally gratifying. I'm not a warm or gregarious man by nature, but I must say, the depth and intensity of Viking friendship and familial bond is unlike any I've encountered in my extensive travels. Frankly, I find it somewhat appealing. Chapter 1. Viking Culture. Membership in the Hidden Ones requires far more than just physical training. After all, our creed requires us to blend seamlessly into places we visit. Some quite foreign, such discipline demands a solid familiarity with local custom and lore. As a result, acolytes and masters alike spend countless hours studying foreign cultures and history. When Master Basim was called to spearhead our counter moves against the Order of the Ancients in Northern Europe, we started with an immersive review of travel accounts from that region, archived in the Imperial Library of Constantinople, my first visit to that temple of knowledge. I must confess, wonder struck me like a thunderbolt, very nearly debilitating, when I first entered the library's grand atrium. I'm a scholar by temperament, and spending days surrounded by 100,000 volumes. Well, it was like a magician had conjured my personal paradise. Did you know the Imperial Collection includes a scroll of Homer's collected works, 120 feet long, inscribed in gold ink by the Levant's finest calligraphers? I can think of no document more sacred. And yet, foraging through troves of parchment chronicles, Bassam and I were forced to rely on clearly flawed transcriptions of Viking oral tradition, as well as sketchy Frankish and Saxon accounts of barbarous Viking behavior, to construct our initial cultural overview. Of course, these misconceptions were challenged when we first met Sigurd on that dock in the Golden Horn, and then swept away after our Regelfleck arrival. In Norway and England, my own eyes and ears have provided too much context. This chapter provides a distillation of my findings, both scholarly and observational, on Viking culture. Keep in mind that, like all Hidden One acolytes, I kept a careful journal of daily observations. We do this to help construct a chronicle of the events, people, and cultures encountered in our assignments. Viking expansion. The Norse homeland to the north features a starkly beautiful, but often frozen and forbidding landscape. Jagged white peaks drop into silver fjords, carved in the coastline like an artisan's engraving, so unlike the fiery escarpments of my Levantine homeland. The deep red rays on the Mountain of Fire, Jabal Farhar. Soils along Norway's coastline and southern rim are lush and fertile, but aren't enough to sustain a growing population. European scholars typically depict the Viking expansion as a barbarian bloodlust for plunder and glory, with the Viking expansion southward into Anglo-Saxon and Frankish territory was more likely an entirely practical attempt to settle more arable land and pasture. One other element of Norse society probably came into play. In Norway, the wealthiest and most powerful jarls control vast estates. Ancestral land cannot be divided, and thus is inherited by a single family member. This leaves many Norse descendants with a burning desire to acquire land of their own. With limited opportunities in the Northlands, these folk have little choice but to seek fortune elsewhere. Exploring the world. Viking maritime skill is truly legendary. Chronicles I reviewed suggest that Norse explorers and traders have reached coastal regions all the way from Norway, rounding Jabal Tariq to the Levant and beyond, even finding routes east to the Black Sea. Again, the first Viking I ever met was Sigurd Styrbjorn. He and his longship crew had circumvented Europe, sailing nearly 5,600 Roman miles from their native Norway to Constantinople. However, while Vikings display remarkable skill at navigating open seas, they actually prefer river travel, exploring inland channels instead of skirting shorelines. Traveling via interior waterways often requires portage, a process where crews drag their boats ashore and haul them overland to skirt obstacles such as waterfalls or dangerous rapids. I've personally witnessed Viking sailors carry a longship on their shoulders more than a mile to the next navigable stretch of water. Pre-Viking Britannia. Back in Rome's imperial heyday, a Roman legion was as invincible a military unit as the world had ever seen. When Emperor Claudius invaded England in 43 CE, his army rolled over the ragtag British tribes that tried to resist. By 87 CE, the conquest was essentially complete, with Roman control extended over all but the islands far north and west. Rome called the new territory Britannia. In 122 CE, Emperor Hadrian oversaw construction of a massive defensive wall, often called Hadrian's Wall, that extended coast to coast across England's northern neck. This imposing barrier established the northern boundary of Roman rule. It helped control trade flow and the economy in Roman Britain, and perhaps most importantly, stood as a commanding monument to Roman might for 3 centuries. But eventually, administrating such large provinces while defending them from the hordes of hostile tribes drew down the resources of the Western Roman Empire. By 410 CE, Rome had withdrawn all its garrisons from Britannia, leaving behind hundreds of imperial structures and a yawning power void. This void was quickly filled by native Picts and Celtic Britons, and then an influx of Germanic tribes flowing across the sea from the continent, primarily pagan Saxons and Angles, and a later wave of Christianized Jutes. The Viking arrival in England. The earliest Viking moves into England typically involved small raiding parties. One or two longships would probe coastal or upriver settlements or monasteries looking to plunder and leave. But sometime in the 860s CE, a legendary Viking jarl named Ragnar Lothbrok led a much larger warband of warriors into England, seeking to conquer territory and establish permanent settlements. Ragnar's string of successes ended when he lost a decisive battle to the Northumbrian king Ella, who promptly tossed his captured Viking foe into a pit of snakes. The Great Heathen Army. When word of Ragnar's tawdry, dishonorable execution reached Norway, his sons, Halfdan, Ubba, and Ivar, the Boneless, rallied a large cohort of Viking warriors and set out for England to seek revenge and reclaim their fathers' conquered lands. Anglo-Saxon church propagandists called it the Great Heathen Army, hoping to stir up a powerful pagan-hating resistance across Christian England. But the Ragnarsons embraced the derogatory name with a fierce glee. Ironically, Halfdan's so-called heathens included fighters from Norse settlements across Francia, Friesland, the Scottish Islands, and Ireland. In those areas, Viking settlers, many who'd been there for decades, often had to convert to Christianity before they could trade goods with Christians or boost their social status in church-dominated territory. Thus, the army's throng of pagans actually included a considerable number of Christians. The Viking conquests. The Ragnarsson expedition, said to include 250 longboats carrying 10,000 warriors, landed in East Anglia in 865 CE and began to sweep shire by shire across the island. The Great Heathen Army's decentralized deployment and agile supply lines let its Viking warbands move with remarkable speed. This provided a distinct advantage over the large, slow Saxon armies that required much logistical support. Before long, the sons of Ragnar had brought Northumbria under heel and slew their father's murderer, King Aelle. By 871, their forces had also driven from Theodford in East Anglia to Reading in Mercia, where they were soon joined by the Great Summer Army, reinforcements from Norway, led by the Viking Jarl Guthrum. This combined force spent years consolidating control of Mercia, eventually disposing the Saxon king Burgred and establishing Danelaw laws across a number of shires. By 875, the Vikings were finally ready to challenge the most powerful Saxon leader in England, King Alfred of Wessex. From Mercia, they plunged south to Wareham, then west across Wessex, battling Alfred's formidable forces. Some of these expeditions are chronicled in my journal entries in the section of this tome titled The Viking Age. Under Guthrum's leadership, the Viking army met the West Saxons in a cataclysmic battle at Chapam and forced Alfred to flee for his life. How Vikings rule. Over my years based in Ravensthorpe, I've grown increasingly impressed by the general Viking practice of what I term benevolent conquest. Make no mistake, the sheer brutality of a Viking assault is a nightmarish terror to behold. But once a targeted region submits in obedience, these northern conquerors tend to rule with a light touch. They don't impose culture or religious beliefs on the conquered. In fact, Vikings often let local thanes oversee their old districts, a reassuring continuity that local subjects tend to appreciate. Beyond that, Viking jarls retain power and ensure loyalty by sharing the wealth. History shows time and again that amassing great wealth while one subject's language is a sure prescription for insurrection. But when Norse leaders acquire loot via trade or raid, they typically redistribute equitable portions of the take to allies and subjects. This sharing keeps the locals in line. Vikings at war. Field tactics. Viking raiding parties and war bands are truly terrifying to behold in battle. Their prowess is due less to superior gear or numbers than to astonishing mobility, cunning feints, brutally efficient close-quarters combat skills, and raw fury. They also rely on the elements of surprise and ambush, even in larger engagements, employing carefully timed ruses and deception to distract and overwhelm foes. A phalanx of Viking fighters can sweep across the battlefield with shocking alacrity, I guess. Scouting. Good intelligence is always the underpinning of effective military strategy. Before embarking on any expedition, Viking leaders and scouts and traders to gather information on targets they intend to hit. Based on this knowledge, they decide whether to attack an Anglo-Saxon leader, or, if he's too powerful, offer their mercenary services to him. To this point, one of my agents in Winchester found a fascinating chronicle from 789 CE tucked in the historical records of the seminary library. The first known Viking raid on Anglo-Saxon soil took place that year, when 3 longships from Hordofike landed on an isle of the southern coast of Wessex. This small raid triggered a series of reconnaissance visits. Viking scouts and merchants began to probe coastal areas, trading with locals while gaining insight into the region. Eventually, Viking spies learned that nearby Lindisfarne Abbey was loaded with loot and was lightly defended. This led to the infamous sack of the abbey in 793 CE, which many scholars consider the seminal event of the Viking Age. Weapons. Viking life is a marital culture, without a doubt. Indeed, Viking custom not only allows the owning of weapons, but actually requires it of all free Norsemen. Sigurd once told me this decree comes down from Odin himself. Weapons with a fine finish and ornamental inlays are highly valued and convey status in Norse society. A wealthy Viking typically maintains a full personal armory: axe, long sword, knife, round shield, helmet, mail armor, and maybe even a bow, with a quiver of finely weighted arrows. The most common Viking weapon is the spear. Even the poorest of farmers keep one on the wall. After all, the magical spear Gungnir is the primary weapon of Odin himself. Seasoned Viking warriors often pair a thrusting or throwing spear with a stout head-splitting battle axe, often named after a she-troll for some reason. Serviceable longswords are far more difficult to smith, and thus quite expensive, so they tend to be wielded only by wealthier Norsemen. Wealthy Vikings are often buried with their prized sword. Viking war chiefs sometimes organize their lower-class freemen and slaves into open formations of light, infantry armed with knives, cheap slings, and stones. I've also noticed that Viking settlers in England and Ireland rely on the heavy single-edged knife blade of a sea axe, a cheap but effective alternative to an axe or sword. Foot and horseback. Vikings sometimes use horses to deploy quickly across the terrain to battle. Upon arrival, however, the combatant typically dismounts to fight. Committing to the fight on foot is seen as the mark of a true warrior. No swift retreat is possible. Eivor claims this commitment strengthens the bond between warband brethren on the battlefield. Overwintering camps. In the early days of the Viking incursions, back before Norse settlers began to make permanent homes in England and Francia, raiding parties usually carried out their forays during the summer months so they could sail back home in time for the fall harvest. Sometimes, however, circumstances forced Viking raiders to find a place to spend the winter. They would seek shelter on a small cove or river island to wait out the cold. This was called an overwintering camp. Later, after the first conquest of Ragnar Lothbrok and the follow-up expeditions of his son's great heathen army, the large Viking forces no longer sought to return to Norway. The army still encamped for the cold months, often in villages or even major cities, like Repton, Jorvik, and Lunden. Some of the temporary overwintering sites ended up as permanent settlements, like Ravensthorpe, for example, established by the Raven clan at the camp where Halfdan's army spent the brutal winter of 871 CE. Viking society. Vikings are more than just savage warriors, despite what Saxon monks would have us think. As I write this in 878 CE, the relentless Viking spread across England has been ongoing for years. Norsemen are no longer strangers to this land. Indeed, many call England home. In most shires, Norse and Saxon folk lived peaceably side by side, farming and trading and raising families. Children of Viking settlers have spent their entire lives here, absorbing aspects of Saxon custom and religion, even speaking the local languages. And yet, despite this natural assimilation, I'm impressed by the resilience of bedrock Viking values. Viking social structures are as solid and vibrant here in England as in their northern homelands. Viking social structures. Family and destiny, the Hamingja. Family is indeed the cornerstone of Norse society. Blood relations are bound together by the Hamingja, a spiritual entity that Viking lore depicts as a giant spectral woman. This ghostly guardian of prosperity and good fortune serves as a kind of mystical heritage, the embodiment of a family's luck and destiny. Every Hamingja demands respect and care to flourish. If a person or a family behaves badly, their luck could turn bad too. The lore also holds that a family's ancestral spirits support the Hamingja by visiting young descendants in dreams to pass on family wisdom and values. Children learn of their inherited glory and failures. Family is important in the Danelaw too. Rules about land holding, inheritance, and more are all centered around the family rather than the individual. A person who does not know their lineage or ancestry is not legally recognized. To codify lineage, it is a common Viking practice to honor one's kin, living or dead, by engraving their stories and deeds on runestones. That said, Viking communities are remarkably welcoming to strangers from outside family circles. I can certainly attest to that. As I've noted elsewhere in this compendium, my unreserved acceptance into the Raven clan at Ravensthorpe is something I continue to find extraordinary. The clan. Several Viking households may come together to form a clan, or eidr. Clan bonds can be established via blood relations or marriage, or by an oath made during a legal assembly. Clansmen are bound by honor to defend or avenge one another. Each clan name is typically constructed by adding ung or ing to the name of a famous ancestor or god, although some use a favored animal, the raven and wolf clans of Riggisfolk, for example. Clans typically have dozens or even hundreds of members. The Félag. The Viking Félag is a legal business or social partnership. Formed by two or more people, a Félag is typically created to pool resources so its partners can fund financial ventures such as building longships or undertaking sea voyages for trade. The term Félag can also refer to the union of a married couple because it unusually has financial implications for both families. Indeed, forming a Félag is often like creating an extended family for the partners. Each Félagi, the term for a member of the fellowship, is expected to protect his fellows and their interests. If a Félagi is killed, the Félag partners may be expected to stage his funeral and honor his memory with a carved runestone. Depending on the circumstances, if, for example, the killing is criminal, unjust, or otherwise undeserved, the Félag might even be obliged to avenge the deceased partner. The Althing. This remarkable tradition is a formal assembly of Norse freemen. Issues of trade, war, politics, alliance, honor, marriage, inheritance, and succession can be debated and settled here. The Althing also serves as a court of law for resolving clan feuds, thus reducing social disorder. Aggrieved parties can demand justice for wrongs or slights. Rules are made, crimes judged, and punishments doled out. Interestingly, Vikings have no written legal code, but overseers called the Gobi have committed all laws to memory. More on these later. The uncommon inclusivity of the Viking Althing makes it an extraordinary social institution. So unlike the highly stratified systems of governance, even in most places, including my Caliphate homeland, although a king or jarl presides over the forum, all freemen are encouraged to speak openly, share opinions, and weigh in on important issues. Of course, as in all societies, the wealthiest and most powerful members tend to control the agenda and steer the decision-making process. But even so, every freeman has the right to be heard, an impressively progressive development for a people so widely portrayed in scholarly circles as a backward warrior culture obsessed with pillage and murder. Viking social case. Bondi, the freeman. The Viking freeman, or bondi, forms the core unit of social organization in a Viking settlement. These hard-working farmers, craftsmen, merchants, fishermen, and traders not only drive the local economy, but also play a major role in community justice and lawmaking. As mentioned above, all boender, the plural of bondi, have the right, and indeed the duty, to attend the freemen's assembly known as the Althing. Any bondi is eligible to serve as judge or jury during legal proceedings. Every freeman also has the right to bear arms, which is not the case for women or slaves. Here, there's a little picture. It says the vestments of free women offer practical protection against the unforgiving elements, while also representing Nordic culture and tradition with intricate embroidery. The free woman. Free women in the Viking settlements are revered as pillars of both family and clan. Some, like Eivor and Soma and Luvina, come to serve as powerful shield maidens, fearsome female warriors said to be infused with the spirit of Valkyrie goddesses. Here I must note that Eivor is not particularly fond of the term shield maiden. Among those who do not bear arms, a typical Viking free woman is responsible for her household's economy, including the direct care of family members, young and old. Many free women tend to their clan's reputation and wider affairs as well. Again, I've witnessed the formidable strength of the Viking free woman firsthand here in Ravensthorpe. I've seen the critical role they play in Viking communities and the tremendous respect they garner. But let me insert this observation I came upon recently, an excerpt from a private journal produced at Alastair Monastery by the good Sister Agnes, holy abbess of the Cloister. She writes, "In secret sojourns to local villages where Dane and Saxon mingle, I've been most impressed with the Norse free woman. As keeper of hearth and home, she is responsible for keeping both home fires, the cooking fire, and the more fundamental flame of family and tribe burning bright. After all, if the latter fire goes out, the harmony of clan is threatened. Sources tell me that for this reason, the hearth is sometimes associated with Yggdrasil, the cosmic tree of Norse myth, and the pillar that upholds the order of the universe. If the home fires flicker too low and Yggdrasil withers, order and harmony will wither too." I find this a truly insightful and accurate description, especially from a Saxon nun, of the Viking free woman's role in Fornburg, Ravensthorpe, and other Norse communities I have visited. The thrall. Slavery is a stain on human history, one very consistent with the dark ethos of the Order of the Ancients. Unfortunately, the abhorrent practice has played a prominent role in the socio-economic structure of Norse society too. Whether captured in raids or traded in markets, Viking slaves, called thralls, are hauled back in chains and used for hard labor tasks, farm work and construction projects, or sold to wealthy households as domestic help. Eivor tells me she herself and her crew were nearly shipped off in shackles by Wolf Clan captors not long before our arrival. The Viking invasion forces brought thralls with them to England, but slavery was not new to those territories. Ironically, although Christianity opposes slavery in theory, involuntary servitude has long been common in Christian lands and in Anglo-Saxon society. Thralls have no legal rights, but some manage to save enough money to buy their freedom. One other sad note, a Viking bondi could, under extreme circumstances, crushing debt or legal jeopardy, renounce his freeman status and sell himself, and sometimes his entire family, into thraldom. Once the indebted pays back what he owes, he and his family could be freed once again. Viking law and justice. Social order and harmony in Norse society relies heavily on two things: the Viking concept of honor and the community-wide assembly called the Althing, mentioned in previous sections. Each Viking community, big or small, holds a regular Althing to address issues of justice, law, commerce, and more. Centrality of honor. Norse justice rests on the deeply cherished Viking concept of honor. Honorable behavior is simply that which is truthful and causes no harm to one's family, clan, and people, whether individual, familial, or even ancestral. Often determines what is considered just in a legal sense, sometimes called heor, meaning brightness. Viking honor is seen as an observable, almost palpable quality reflected in the gaze of others. Indeed, it is often said that one's honor shines. Eivor tells me that an unfortunate offshoot of this notion is the instantaneous display of wealth as citizens seek to visibly shine. How anyone can equate showing off to honor is beyond me. Feuds, vengeance, and the Weirgild. In Viking society, insulting or harming an individual injures both the person and his family. Thus, a rash act of hostility against someone can bring his entire clan down on your head. For the aggrieved party, the only proper response is to seek retribution, an act seen as not only a vested right but a sacred duty. In the Vikings' eyes, anyone who chooses inaction over rightful revenge risks becoming a Nullinger, a cowardly, shameful individual. One legal way to restore your honor, or your clan's honor, is to declare a feud. Feuds are monitored by the Freemen's Assembly to ensure fairness and keep the conflict from getting out of hand. Participants in a feud must pay for any damage caused, including weirgild, literally man price. Each person in society, according to age, gender, and social status, is assigned a monetary value called a weirgild. This price can be demanded as recompense for injury, loss of reputation, or loss of life. I've since learned that this practice is common among Germanic tribes. I've seen lieges listing elaborate tariffs or compensation. Out of morbid curiosity, I asked Eivor how my own weirgild might be assessed if I was to be terminated in some illegal fashion. Grinning, she directed me to a Godi in Repton, a serious fellow named Frodi. He's a bit dour for a Viking. Frodi asked me a few questions about my lineage and associations, consulted a set of scrolls, and then made some mysterious calculations in his head. In the end, Frodi determined that my weirgild was 0. You have no value to others in your clan, he said. He added that if I were at least a thrall, I'd be worth something. Eivor found my report on this quite amusing. The Godi, or lawkeeper. Vikings don't have law libraries like those in Rome, Constantinople, or even London. Instead, they have the Godi, remarkable individuals who have committed every single local Viking law to their memory. With this skill comes great social and political influence, as you might imagine. The Godi's unique knowledge requires that they help preside at every Althing, the assembly where the community's freemen make decisions on trade, war, local disputes, succession, and politics. The very title Godi, or God, might imply that the lawkeeper also serves a religious role. While Vikings do not have clerics like Christians, they believe that the Godi serve the gods by knowing the law. Why? Law is considered an instrument of order, just as the gods bestowed order and harmony to the universe, so the Godi's knowledge of law helps to keep the peace in his community. I'm going to take a brief recess, and I want to show you folks this picture here. And this picture is the end of the game where Eivor thought that this was actually Valhalla, and what this was designed to do from the ones that came before was to create a sort of heaven, so the ones that came before, instead of dying, could just be hooked into this machine and literally just live out the rest of their days hooked into this machine, sort of like heaven. And that's where Basim is found towards the end. And as we all know, Basim is really Loki in disguise. And Eivor, as we all know, is Odin, I believe, if I remember correctly from the game. I think Eivor is Odin. I'm pretty sure. No, Sigurd, I think, is Odin. Eivor, I forget who Eivor is, but anyway. Viking beliefs and customs, or the horror of exile. Let's go here. Death is not the worst punishment for Vikings. Remember, Norse life is deeply family-oriented and fundamentally communal. Thus, my Raven clan friends tell me that no fate is more dire than to be judged an outlaw or ultgar, and thus exiled from your community. Banishment means not only leaving the settlement, but also having no further contact with family or clan. And Vikings believe this means separation even from your ancestors. Without land, clan, or ancestors, an outlaw is considered no more than a beast. Hence, it is legal to hunt him. Vikings' beliefs and customs. During my years in Ravensthorpe, I've been consistently impressed by the depth of Norse engagement with what I'll call the mysteries of existence. Vikings are not strictly religious in the same formal sense as Christian or Muslim cultures. Although most Norse folk believe in fate and destiny, gods, spirits, realms of the dead, ancestor worship, rune magic, dream interpretation, and more, they have no clergy. That is, no elite cadre or institution interpreting the Holy Scripture or presiding over religious rituals. Some public events are led by a community's chief or jarl, but a remarkably wide variety of citizens can officiate most Norse ceremonies. Here, in this picture, it says, an artistic depiction of Mimsabrunr, the mythical well in which Mimir's severed head rests. The well itself is said to be found among the roots of Yggdrasil, the world tree. The Viking self, Haminga, Flyja, Hammer, and Hugr. Norse culture holds that spirits inhabit every person. 4 different types of entities dwell within and form the self. One is the Haminga, the great spirit of destiny in every family. I mentioned this entity earlier. Another is the Flyja, a sort of guardian angel who appears in dreams or trances, often as an animal, to personally guide you. Both of these totemic spirits, Haminga and Flyja, are said to pass on to your descendants. The other 2 spirits belong only to you. The Hammer is the outer self, one's physical form, the shape or shell of a person. Basically, it's your body, the part of you perceived by others. One Norse superstition is that shapeshifters can alter their Hammer to deceive and bedevil victims. The Hugr, on the other hand, is the inner self, the deep, essential nature of one's being. It's your personality, the way you think, your truest wishes and desires. Authentic Vikings try to express their Hugr via their Hammer. That is, they seek to act and look the way they truly feel inside. This effort is why clothing, hair, body art, and other accessories carry so much import in Viking culture. They reveal one's inner spirit. Vikings want you to see who they are in a glance. An adventurous sea-loving sailor might sport a face tattoo of the Viking runic compass, symbol of divine guidance on the waters, or a skald might wear a cloak brooch or belt buckle engraved with Odin's 3-horned triskelion, symbol of poetic inspiration. Inescapable fate. The Norse consider fate to be the most powerful force in the cosmos. It's a magical energy flowing from Yggdrasil, the tree of life, binding all things together and propelling them unstoppably through time and space. The skalds portray fate as unyielding, uncompromising. No man nor monster can stand against it. Not even the gods themselves can alter fate. Viking lore sees fate driving the universe toward a final cataclysmic battle, one that will trigger the destruction of everything. This apocalypse, called Ragnarok, is the inescapable destiny of the 9 realms. Runes and runestones. Runes make up the Futhark, the Norse runic alphabet. Note, the word Futhark itself comes from the sounds of the first 6 letters of runic script, F, U, T, H, A, R, and K. In Norse culture, runes also function as symbols latent with senior magic. In fact, the Norse term rune means secret or esoteric knowledge. In other words, when certain runes are engraved on a stone, you can create an object that carries special meaning and power. These runestones tell stories and honor people or events. Families commission runestones to commemorate lost loved ones. Vikings also believe that certain runestones can bestow elemental power on weapons, shields, armor, and even on warriors themselves. The Volva. Special seers called Volver, usually women, but not always, are renowned in Viking society for their mastery of divination skills. Using oracular techniques passed down for generations, a Volva is said to pierce the fabric of time, soothsaying the future using Seinor magic. She also concocts potions from odd ingredients that, when consumed, transport people to mystical realms. Frankly, I find these claims a bit fantastical, but Eivor swears by her visionary interactions with Volka, the Volva serving the spiritual needs of the Raven Clan community. This is her right here. Volvur typically live on the fringes of society for obvious reasons. Their powers are clearly intimidating. An experienced seer, it is said, can read sacred runes and tap their inscrutable powers. She also achieves insight by attaining ritual trance-like states. These often involve a staff used like a spindle to spin the threads of fate. Once spun, apparently, these threads can be read and somehow understood. According to Viking lore, the first seer to practice Seinor was the Norse goddess Freya. Good footsteps to follow him if you believe in such things as gods. The Viking economy. Fishing. While it is true that the Norse are renowned warriors and merchants, it should be noted that they are first and foremost fishermen. Indeed, most of a Viking's food comes from the sea. Dried fish is a primary staple of the Norse diet. To dry a fish, one simply attaches the catch, usually cod or haddock in the Northlands, to a wooden rack. Then you let the sun and open air do their work. By the end of the week, the fish is dried and ready to eat, usually mixed with butter for a more consumable texture. Dried fish is surprisingly tasty, especially when washed down with a mug of mead. Farming. My travels in England reveal that Norse settlers are clearly flourishing here, boosted by a sharp rise in agricultural production due to the island's abundant and fertile soils. Tilling land alongside their Anglo-Saxon neighbors, Viking farmers raise livestock and cultivate cereal grains, barley for brewing beer, rye, and wheat for coarse bread flours, and oats to feed their animals. Their cattle provide milk and meat, and their oxen plow the fields. Norse farmers also grow legumes and herbs like dill and coriander for spice and seasoning, as well as flax and hemp to produce textiles for clothing and trading. Honey and mead. Honey is valued by Norsemen as a sweetening agent in cooking and dining, but more importantly, as a key ingredient in the production of mead, a drink brewed from water, honey, and yeast. Indeed, beehives are ubiquitous near Viking villages, often placed in fields of flax seeds, poppies, and heather. Some call mead the oldest alcoholic beverage known to man, having gone by various names throughout history, such as ambrosia, nectar, and honey wine. One thing is certain, Vikings love their mead. No feast would be without it. Here's an interesting tidbit of Viking culture. The term honeymoon refers to the Norse practice of giving newlyweds all the mead they want for a full moon cycle, roughly a month after the wedding. The forge. A good blacksmith like Gunnar in Ravensthorpe brings great value to a Viking settlement. The smith needs a forge that generates extremely high heat to work his metals. Using wood charcoal as fuel works well, but prepping wood can be tricky. When burning wood is exposed to too much air, it turns to ash instead of charcoal. To prevent this, the smith buries the wood in a deep hole, ignites it, then covers his fire pit with a thick layer of turf, cutting off the air. This way, the wood can burn slowly and char for many hours before being extracted as lump charcoal and dumped in the forge. Barter and coins. Bartering was the basis of the Norse exchange of goods for many generations. A trader might negotiate how many chickens is a fair trade for a bolt of wadmal wool, but as Norse traders moved further across Europe to the Middle East, coinage began to emerge as a favorite tool of economic exchange. Minting precious metals into coins is a system of trade that can easily quantify the equivalent value of goods. It's also much easier to haul off a good bribe or ransom paid in coins than, say, a large herd of goats. These days, Vikings are quite fond of their hack silver. When Vikings acquire silver items, they chop or hack them up. These silver hacks are more transportable and easier to use in value-weighted transactions. Hacked up silver can also be melted and molded into bullion, another favored currency. The daily life of a Viking. Grooming and hygiene. Unlike the hairy, wild-eyed brutes portrayed in church chronicles, Norse men and women take great pride in their appearance, bathing regularly and anointing themselves with fragrant natural scents. Women tend carefully to their hair, braiding and intricately styling their long locks. Men trim and tidy their facial hair using truly exquisite combs, finely crafted from wood, metal, and bone. I swear these beard combs are works of art. Sometimes male warriors even braid their beards and adorn them with beads. After all, one's look at a feast or on a battlefield is important. As you might expect, more rigorous standards for personal grooming are favored by people of high social status with more time and coin to spend on their appearance. This social phenomenon seems consistent across every culture I've ever visited. And here it shows this member of the Wolf clan displays his affluence with gold fittings upon his belt and in his beard, and gold inlay in his axe. He wears the pelt of his clan's namesake for warmth and as a display of personal honor. I'll show you him right here. That's this guy. Fashion. Like personal grooming, fashion can be a way for Norse folk to showcase their wealth and social status. Deep, richly colored fabrics indicate that the material has been dyed more than once. Since dyeing is expensive, wearing such hues of clothing is a sure sign of success. Blue fabrics are particularly painstaking and expensive to produce, and thus worn only by the very wealthy. Jewelry is a sign of social status too. Colorful glass or stone beads are prized fashion accessories. While silver is not cheap, gold settings are far more expensive, and thus another indicator of great wealth and standing. To be perfectly honest, I find much of the status-seeking behavior I encounter in the world to be superfluous and silly, as does Eivor, I'm happy to say. Fortunately, I found very little of it in Ravensthorpe. The Raven clan seems like a well-grounded tribe of kinfolk. Games and sport. Vikings are generally a robust, healthy people who enjoy various games and activities in their free time. I find their pastimes to be invigorating and quite challenging, both physically and mentally. A chance to hone one's tactical cunning, mental fitness, and physical strength. Ever since my grievous injury at Kjovi's hands, I've become a somewhat less vigorous participant in the athletic sports, but I continue to enjoy the games of wit and strategy. Norse board games are often strategy contests. One called Henolfr is played on a last 13 by 13 game board. One player controls a king and his guard detail. This group must survive the attack of the other player's pieces placed around the four sides of the board. The game pieces themselves are quite striking, made of bone or walrus ivory. Viking outdoor sports are quite competitive and demanding, requiring strength, endurance, and agility. Back in Momentinius Wrigglefrick, many Norse folk would fasten long, narrow boards to their feet and race downhill in the snow, as strange a sport as I've ever seen. Another activity is a form of wrestling called glima, where nearly any hold is legal. Both men and women participate. Each wrestler struggles to pin their opponent to the ground, using sudden, unexpected moves. Glima is a Norse word that means glimpse or flash. Participants take the sport very seriously, seeing it as a form of martial training for combat. Look at this photo here. This, I believe, was... Okay, so remember earlier I told you that you were hooked up to that machine and you saw you saw Valhalla? Well, this is the image of what the ones that came before would see. This is Valhalla right here. This right here is the meeting place where people would live. They'd eat every day, and then they'd go into the battlefields beyond and start fighting. Skaldic poetry. I will say this about Viking sea voyages. The long hours could be filled with intolerable boredom, if not for the crew's exceptional skalds. A skald is a mixture of poet, musician, teacher, and historian, all in one package. Indeed, a gifted skald is one of the most highly valued members of Viking society, a teller of tales that memorialize his clan. Skalds compose poems full of clever kenning metaphors: whale path, sea, feather fall, snow, spearden or shield thunder, battle, blood ember, axe, raven's meal, corpse, that celebrate glory, mourn tragedy, and reveal deep truths about Viking values. On our month-long voyage from Constantinople, Skald Bragi's stories and sea chanties were some of the most entertaining and poignant I'd ever heard. One favorite was the Battle of Honi and Hoinen, a tale Bragi first heard in the court of Ragnar Lothbrok. Hoinen, a Viking prince, had kidnapped the daughter of Hogni, a powerful Viking jarl. When Hogni tracked her down, Hoinen sent out his army to fight, and many warriors were slain on both sides. That night, Hogni's daughter, Hildur, had secretly married her captor, snuck onto the battlefield, and recited Saerin incantations to resurrect all the fallen fighters, hoping to end the hostilities. But the next day, the warriors simply rose and fought again. This was repeated day after day, but the bloody feud faded to repeat itself until the dawn of Ragnarok. The tale and the joyous nature of Bragi's telling reveal the Viking spirit, recalling the legend of Valhalla, which is this: a place where battles never end, where the fallen are revived again and again for the next glorious clash. I also found Bragi's kenning striking battle is the steel eddy. Warriors are battle wolves, with corpse dew dripping from dark-hewn paths. My favorite image positioned a warrior's bed during nighttime nightmares as his floor steed. Such a marvelous metaphor. Vikings, a seafaring people. Bassam and I both agree that Viking culture is in a rising phase of regional dominance that may last decades, if not centuries. History shows us how maritime prowess is so often predictive of rapid economic growth and the spread of culture. In northern Europe, there is no greater sailor than the Norseman, and no trader with greater range and network than the Norse merchant. Then again, nothing is feared more than the approach of a square-sailed fleet of Viking longboats adorned with monsters on the prow. Sea lore navigation. Let's take a look at that photo here. Anyone can learn to sail a boat. Indeed, in a Viking settlement, the more sailing knowledge shared by all, the better. But every Norse crew has at least one member who is particularly skilled at navigation. This person guides the expedition and ensures safe passage to the destination. The Norse term for the navigator is Leigumornor, the human Maor gifted with knowledge of the overall route, Legisaga, who knows which path, lead, is the fastest or least risky. I've had the great pleasure of meeting one of these legendary seafarers. Othir of Hagaland just may be the hairiest human I've ever met. According to Eivor, Othir's fabled knowledge of northern sea routes is locked tight inside his head, and he has much to teach both the Christian and Islamic worlds about navigation. Like all Norse navigators, Othir rarely relies on physical objects, such as sunstones, to plot a course. Rather, he draws on an ancestral tradition and personal experience to hone his seafaring skills. With no compasses or detailed nautical maps for guidance, a Viking navigator needs an unerring knowledge of the seascape, a knowledge referred to as sea lore. One way to acquire such lore is comprehensive familiarity with oral tradition. Othir follows sailing routes discovered decades, even centuries ago. This sea lore is passed down by word of mouth from generation to generation, relearned and memorized, and mastered via on-the-water experience. After navigating hundreds of open sea journeys, Othir has gained an unmatched feel for guiding a keeled boat through different currents and weather patterns, noting wind flow, the color of the sea, the shape and movement of waves. His mastery is extraordinary, and he's actively passing his sea lore along to eager young sailors. The Viking Longship. The fearsome Viking longship, signature vessel of the Northern Fleet, has served as the relentless sea steed of Norse command, of Norse commercial expansion and social influence across Europe. Viking shipwrights, renowned for their world-class skill, combine a deep understanding of nautical design with a keen sense of craftsmanship. They typically work with a construction crew of 8 to 10 builders. The boat building process. Right here. A true technical marvel, the Viking longship features long, narrow, shallow draft hulls that provide good speed and impressive stability in rough waters. The longship's short keel depth is well suited for upriver travel, navigating waters as shallow as 1 meter deep, perfect for easy beach landings. It also sports cleverly jointed mainmasts that lower to pass under bridges. Hull and keel. To build a longship, the shipwright first fashions the hull using hardwood lumber for solidity. The wood is carefully split by axe along the grain to make the boards flexible. Each hull is clinker built, that is, its timber planks overlap each other like fish scales. These boards are then nailed together with metal rivets and caulked with hemp and horsehair soaked in tar or tallow so water won't soak throughout the hull. After the hull is set, the right adds a short keel, the backbone of the ship. A single rudder in the stern suffices for steering. The mast. Next, the Wright and his team fashion the single mast. Longship masts are made from softer wood, which allows for not only suppleness but good height too. The mast is attached to the hull using a fish-shaped piece of wood, so the sail doesn't resist wind along the mast's length, but rather moves with it. This flexibility, coupled with that of the ship's hull, makes the longship truly elastic. As Gudrun, one of Ravensthorpe's master shipwrights, explained to me recently, rather than split the waves, my boats slither through them like an eel. Sail. The square felted sail is a signature feature of the Viking boat. Produced by the clan's best seamstress, these sails are spun and sewn from a coarse, dense wool called wadmal. Wadmal sailcloth is more waterproof and resistant to tearing than other materials. Leather strips crisscrossing the sail also help it keep its shape when wet. I'm told that felted sails are a relatively recent addition to longships, just a few generations ago. Norse sailors relied entirely on oars for maritime locomotion. Today, good oarsmen are still highly valued in a longship crew, but sails are a standard feature on every boat. One reason, as Norse land wealth has increased, bigger flocks of sheep are grazing ever larger pastures, and thus much more wadmal wool is available for sail making. Figurehead. All Viking ships are renowned for their fearsome figureheads. Mounted at the prow, the carved heads, usually of dragons, monsters, or wild animals, are meticulously sculpted from a single piece of wood. These carvings are not just purely decorative. Vikings believed that hostile shores are guarded by protective spirits called landvatir. Longship mastheads are designed to intimidate or scare away such spirits. Conversely, when visiting a friendly territory, Vikings removed threatening mastheads to avoid offending or frightening their hosts. First launch, blooding the keel. Construction of a longship requires many months of intensive labor. Thus, the initial launch of a newly finished vessel is considered a truly special event by the community, akin to birthing a child. The newborn boat is ritually named and blessed. Vikings call this christening rite blooding the keel. Again, the keel is considered the spine of the boat. Blooding the keel simply means getting the keel wet as the boat is lowered into the water for the first time. Some monastic accounts I've read suggest that the rite's name indicates some sort of human or animal sacrifice to appease the Norse gods, literally sprinkling a gored victim's blood on the boat's keel. However, in my experience at Ravensthorpe, it seems that the term is only a metaphor, not unlike so many other evocative metaphors found in Norse poetry and lore. Cargo ship, the Nor. The Viking longship is certainly the most iconic vessel on the water today, but the seafaring Norse folk produced several types of vessels. The most common is the basic cargo hauler, an ocean-going trader called the Nor. It has a wider, deeper hull than a longship, with plank decking only at bow and stern. As a result, the Nor has a more spacious cargo hold that can bear more weight than other Viking ships, up to 24 tons of freight, in fact. The Nor may not be as swift or maneuverable as a warship, but it's the perfect vessel for commercial trade and transport, adaptable enough to navigate both deep ocean currents, the Whale Road, and shallow inland rivers, the Swan Road. Last month I personally witnessed one of these sturdy craft ferry a small clan of Norse settlers from Rigelsvik, including their livestock and supplies, into the Ravensthorpe port. In essence, a single Norse shipped in a new village for the Danelaw. Viking sea trade. Despite fevered portrayals of Viking bloodlust by Saxon monks and displaced Danes, the bulk of Viking activity in Europe this century has been peaceful trade and commerce. From Norway, Viking cargo ships set out with pallets of fox, bear, otter, and beaver furs and pelts, plus crates of whalebone, soapstone, walrus tusk ivory, and other highly valued northern products. They also carry amber, a fossilized resin cut and polished to make exquisite jewelry, a highly prized commodity in trading posts to the south. In Europe and beyond, the Norse merchant fleets find plenty of eager trading partners. Before the Vikings began settling in England, they would trade wheat, wool, honey, and tin with Saxon vendors. Today, they trade for wine and salt in Francia, Arabic silver coins in the Levant, and glass in Italy. This fine Italian glass is often reground into delicate beads for pendants and necklaces. Finally, meeting traders from the Far East along Russian rivers, Viking traders can acquire more exotic luxuries, such as silk and spices. The coastal trader. The coastal trader is exactly that, a lighter ship used primarily to haul cargo along coastlines. This practical Norse vessel is a smaller, nimbler version of the Nor. Easy to handle, the trader is so light that it can be hauled overland via portage on a Viking crew's shoulders from one waterway to the next. Rounder than the Nor, the trader can carry no more than 4 to 5 tons of cargo. The boat can cross long stretches of open sea, if necessary, as its higher freeboard distance from waterline to upper deck makes it more stable when buffeted by high ocean waves. But it needs a good number of working oars to navigate rivers, 10 to 15 sailors typically. Life aboard a longship. Here's an aspect of Viking life that I can address from personal experience. Quarters aboard a Viking longship can be quite cramped, particularly on a longer voyage, like our seemingly endless sojourn with Sigurd from Constantinople to Fornburg. The reason? Longships have an open deck. The distance between keel and deck floor is quite short, usually less than a meter, so travel supplies and equipment, oars, weapons, tools, and so on, must be stacked on deck around the crew. This leaves little room to maneuver or stretch one's legs. This can be a real is rostered on a boat full of rangy, strapping Norse sailors who enjoy referring to their new crewmate as the Levantine Blige Rat. Provisions. As you might expect, the amount and type of provisions stowed aboard a longship differ depending on where you're going, whether sailing across the open seas, skidding a coastline, navigating a river, and so forth. Stocking a ship for a long voyage is always a challenging proposition. Fresh water is stored in casks, with foodstuffs stashed in oaken chests that each sailor oarsman brings aboard as their personal bench. When Eivor found I'd stashed scholarly reading materials in my own bench chest for a recent river journey, she said, "I hope these are tasty, Brother Hyphen." Typically, the Viking sailor's maritime diet revolves around less perishable foods such as smoked meats, dried fish, and hard breads. More perishable items such as fruits or vegetables are added when possible. Since these foods spoil so quickly, the crew often seeks to replace them by foraging or borrowing, raiding, items from nearby settlements. Since cooking with fire is possible on land, the crew may enjoy a hot, fresh meal ashore. On the high seas, however, the cuisine is quite different. During our long tack across the Mediterranean to Jabal Tariq, I consumed enough cured meat strips to last many lifetimes. Sleep and rest. Basic sleeping arrangements can become an almost devilish logistic on a longship. During coastline voyages or river journeys, the crew can simply pull the boat ashore and sleep encamped on land. But for long-distance ocean crossings, crew members are forced to sleep on their bench chest or the deck floor. In cold or inclement weather, a canvas sheet is stretched over the crew, forming a rudimentary tent for protection against the elements. Distribution of spoils. Every freeman member of a longship crew, captain, oarsman, navigator, warrior, has an equal voice in onboard decision-making. But once the expedition ends, any loot accumulated from trade or raid is distributed to investors and crew according to a specified scale. The boat's owner earns the biggest share, of course. Typically, this is the captain or steersman, but not always. If the venture is funded by multiple partners, the wealth is distributed according to the level of their investment. The rest of the crew members usually earn smaller, equal shares, although hired Jonsviking mercenaries might earn more. A Viking's Gateway. In Viking culture, the longship is seen in almost mystical terms. Indeed, Viking sailors feel a special attachment to their vessel, not unlike the emotional bond between a horse and rider. The boat symbolizes transition between two states. Born on land but dwelling at sea, a longship is like a creature that straddles two worlds, serving as a gateway between them. As one Frankish scholar wrote, symbolically then, to set sail is to dwell in a liminal space, suspended between land and sea, life and afterlife. This is one reason why ships figure so prominently in Viking burial rituals. And in our next chapter, we will go over Chapter 2 of Viking lore. This will be a probably 4-part video. I appreciate for all of you those that have watched. We'll have another one tomorrow, Chapter 2, Chapter 3 on Sunday, and Chapter 4 on Monday. And we'll finish it on Monday. So you'll have a 4-part little mini-series here. I appreciate all of you watching. Thank you, and we'll see you in the next video. Bye.